Good morning and welcome to the Hibs Observer, an urgent edition of our morning briefing, because by now you may have heard the news that Hibs have appointed a new head coach, and of course it is the man himself, David Gray, taking the top job finally after just the 4 stints as caretaker manager. I'm joined by Patrick McPartland for some instant reaction to the appointment. First of all, Patrick, how are you? How are you this morning?
I'm very well, thank you.
Surprised? Shocked?
No, not at all. I think probably one of the worst kept secrets in Scottish football over the last couple of weeks. Um, Not necessarily that I think it was inevitable from the start, but I just think, given the way he's kind of conducted himself over the past 3, 4 caretaker stints, and just what he's done with the team, his standing at the club, it seemed like the sort of the smartest appointment. There's always going to be a risk associated with appointing any new manager for most clubs, and obviously there will be risks with this appointment, but at the same time you've got somebody who knows the club very well, knows the standards, knows what the fans expect, and as we've seen from his comments this morning, is just keen to ensure that he's a success, and he can get the club back to where it wants to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Hibs announcing that just after 11 a.m. this morning. Obviously, the news came out last night that Gray had been offered the job. So basically, this morning we're just going to talk through, the kind of various elements of the appointment, the reasons behind it. There's obviously still the question of David Gray's backroom staff, perhaps what it could mean for certain players, folks. So thanks for joining us. Before we really get properly started, I just need to batter through a quick message from our sponsor, MPH Group. They're opening a brand new kitchen showroom in Dunfermline with a VIP Vegas-themed launch weekend from June the 14th to the 16th, and that's from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. There'll be roulette games with instant win prizes such as 10% off services, free boiler services, and a chance to enter a draw for bigger prizes. If you land on zero, you get entered into a grand draw for a 4-night stay at Trump Tower in Vegas, complete with a helicopter tour as well. So don't miss out. RSVP now at www.launch.mph.group to secure your spot. Okay, Patrick, let's get back to it. As I said, just we're kind of looking at the sort of rationale around the appointment. Why kind of Hibs have elected, essentially this time to promote from within. I'm sure we'll hear more from obviously David Gray and Malky Mackay in due course, but there was comments from both of them in the statement. I think what maybe jumped out from the comments from Malky Mackay to me is he specifically mentioned stability, and David Gray's ability to bring that in terms of how embedded he is in the club, how respected he is by the staff, players, basically, everybody. So do you think that's a key element of this appointment, that word stability, because Hibs have, kind of struggled for that for quite a while now?
Yeah, I certainly think that when you consider the upheaval that there's likely to be at the club this summer, in terms of players coming and going, the Black Knight investment, stuff like that, even without, a new sort of head coach coming along, there was that sort of need for stability. Hibs have been crying out for it for quite some time. I don't think you appoint a head coach. I'd be, amazed if this was sort of top of his priority. But I don't think you appoint a head coach purely because it does sort of bring a level of stability. I think that'll almost be like an added bonus. I think that Gray has been at the club for, well, I mean, it's 10 years, 10 years this summer when he was first signed by Alan Stubbs. In fact, it's his first signing after taking the Hibs job. And, in that time, he's sort of experienced cup final defeats as a player, cup final defeats as a caretaker manager. He has, helped Hibs to a second tier title. He's obviously, scored the goal in the cup final, which, obviously the club's highest point in the last, 114 years. And, I just think that having somebody like him with his sort of like ability to not sort of like just connect with the players, but also know what the team needs to be better defensively, to just be more of a threat and just successful. He has worked with so many head coaches. You've probably taken the best bits from them, but you'll also have seen where they've gone wrong as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll have his own ideas about what to do, how he would do things. Because obviously it helps, I think, having been a player at the club as well as a coach and now head coach. He's been in every position, and obviously as captain as well. You've got that sort of level of authority. I think a lot of people, maybe a little bit concerned that because there's still maybe one or two players at the club who he played with, when he was still kicking a ball. It's this concern that oh, is he going to give him like a free pass or something like that? But I don't see him as that sort of person, and I think when Hibs sort of came to replacing Nick Montgomery, it was they kind of exhausted all their options. They've gone down. We've said this before in countless videos before, but they've gone down the route of appointing somebody tried and tested in Lee Johnson. Obviously, not a great deal of experience outside of England. They went down the Montgomery route. Somebody who's been successful in another country and sort of very highly rated as a coach and man manager. Sean Maloney, again, very respected coach, and could have worked. Ended up that it didn't for a variety of reasons. So I think Hibs were kind of limited in where they could go for appointing a head coach this time around, and it really needed to be someone who ticked an awful lot of boxes. And despite his lack of experience as a manager in his own right or a head coach in his own right, I think Gray does tick a lot of those boxes. I think it's that sort of stability that we're talking about. It's knowing the club, knowing the league. It's I think it just makes sense. The more you look at it, the more time elapsed between the end of the season and not getting any white smoke from Easter Road. You did start to think, obviously they're taking their time to make the appointment, but the longer it went on, I think the more clear it became that it was just probably the obvious choice, and not just because he was already in the building. I don't think it's one of those where it's just like, oh well, he's already here, so it'll be it's the easy option. I do think, given what Hibs are doing by bringing in Malky Mackay as a sporting director, with this sort of understanding that things have to be better on the pitch. I don't see that this would have been like a kind of formality. I think it would have been very much a case of okay, you want the head coach job, tell us why you should get it, and I think it bodes well for Hibs if Gray's gone through that process and has still emerged, as they say, as the sort of preferred candidate. I think that should be quite exciting for fans, and I think it should be, should hopefully be the start of things getting a little bit better on the pitch for Hibs.
Yeah, I mean, because he has been, basically, you'd think preparing for this moment from the day that he was appointed to Jack Ross's coaching staff, and I think obviously people will point to the fact that he's not managed in his own right. They would have maybe preferred him to go away and perhaps manage somewhere down the leagues and get a bit of kind of proper experience as the main man. But I think, and maybe pointing to the fact that they don't think the sort of timing is perhaps right for Gray in terms of the sheer kind of level of the overhaul that's going to come this summer. But I think it's that way where timing is very rarely perfect in football. I don't think there's if you're kind of sort of almost preparing somebody for this over a number of years, there might not come a perfect moment where you say, right, every single condition is right for you to step in and take this role. So I think it would be easy for people to look at it at the outside and just say, it's the most convenient choice. It's the guy's already in the building. He's got the sporting director above him. I think it's probably doing Gray a disservice by even just kind of flippantly taking that view, because he's he has put in kind of years of work under different coaches. That I think you've kind of alluded to it earlier on. There's probably there's nobody probably better placed to see everything that's gone wrong over the past few years than David Gray. He's been a complete constant throughout that. So you'd imagine that his interview process and what he's presented to Malky Mackay and the board, that is, this is what I think has gone wrong and here's how I'm going to fix it. So that's if he's got he's come up with a sort of strong plan for that. That's quite compelling for somebody who's been there and seen everything that's happened over the past few years, and he's obviously been developing as a coach over the past few years as well, because I think you can see how the players speak about him. There's definitely a kind of a degree of real kind of respect and just kind of almost admiration, really, I think, that comes across when you hear some of the players speaking about him, that they do that they do really highly value him as a coach. That's kind of got to count for something as well. So I mean, just for me, no football manager appointment comes without risks. Every single appointment is a risk. Nick Montgomery was a risk, despite the fact that he'd had success elsewhere. It's this whole thing about he never really adjusted fully to what Scottish football's all about. You pointed out yourself, Lee Johnson had only really managed in England. It all comes with risks, but I think David Gray, certainly having sat and looked at it and thought about it over the past couple of weeks, he certainly ticks plenty of the boxes, as you say. It might not be the most exciting appointment because when these processes comes around, fans, I think exciting appointment for a fan's point of view, because people look for a sort of a left field name at times. Somebody who's kind of unexpected, maybe coming from elsewhere. But I think it makes sense at this point in time. Bringing it back as well to the point about stability will help bring that to a place that's really not had much of it at all. And you think this would be the kind of start of this new structure starting to, sort of bear a bit of fruit in terms of David Gray. He's very deliberately been named as the head coach. Then we're having Malky Mackay above him. You think the hope for a guy managing his senior level for the first time is that he'll be left to do exactly that, is to coach the team. His main priority will be putting a team on the park. It will not be, obviously we'll still have an input into things like recruitment and the kind of off the pitch side of it as well. But it certainly seems to be set up that the main, David Gray's main role will be to put a winning team on the pitch, and then he'll have Malky Mackay above him to almost guide him as well, because Mackay, he's got a wealth of experience, Malky Mackay. So I think, it does. It makes sense at this point in time, I would say. I think the only sort of question, immediate question I would say at this point is the appointment of his backroom team. So you think that's, for a guy who's taking his first job on in management, that's a really kind of important thing to get right as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think even with Malcolm Mackay in place as a sporting director and all the experience he's accrued over the years, I do think that, it does strike me as the kind of decision that you need to get right. And that's, I'm assuming if it's going to be a similar setup, then it would be like an assistant head coach, a first team coach, and a goalkeeping coach. And I think, again, it's about ticking boxes. I think you need characters that are going to be, good characters who understand what's needed of them. It'd be very easy to look at, for example, Darren McGregor, Guillaume Bouzela, and just say, well, bump them up. But that might be, that might be doing them a bit of a disservice, because they're doing good things with the academy, and you want to give them a chance to keep that going. And again, that allows for some sort of continuity and stability, and it means you're not having to scrabble around to find another couple of coaches to put in there. But Gray strikes me as the kind of man who will have thought about this. Will know exactly who he wants to bring in. Will know exactly the sort of combination of characters in the coaching staff to help get the best out of the team. I'm not 100% sure whether the kind of good cop, bad cop routine, that we've sort of seen over the years, or certainly in history in football, would be, as relevant today as it was once upon a time. But I do think you need to, it can be important. I think a lot of people look at it and just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter who you're bringing in. But, I think it does. I think, I wouldn't be surprised if he does look to bring in sort of maybe a more experienced assistant. We've seen that with a few, with a few managers at Hibs over the years who are sort of taking their first steps. John Collins obviously had, Tommy Craig alongside him. I think when Alan Stubbs came in, obviously similar situation. I know he'd been coaching, in Everton's academy, which is something Gray hasn't done. But, he then brought in sort of, a couple of experienced coaches as his sort of, trusted lieutenants, John Doolan, Andy Holden. And I think that probably helped him, just have that sort of grounding where you can go to them for advice, you can, bounce ideas off them. They can also tap you on the shoulder and say, look, this is the way we should be doing things. And it's just certainly with Stubbs, I think that looked like a really good setup in terms of how the players reacted to it, how it worked, on match days, things like that. So I think, Gray obviously was part of that team. He saw how that worked. Maybe that gives him food for thought going forwards. But, I think it'll be interesting to see who he brings in. I think it'll tell us a lot about what Gray's hoping to achieve, what he values, in a coach and in a person, and potentially what to expect, from the club, in this sort of summer of transition, for want of a better description.
Yeah, just on that summer of transition as well. Obviously, I think we've talked at length about the sort of problems within the Hibs squad. The sort of biggest one at points just being the sheer number of bodies. Guys who are probably not going to contribute, and we've talked about how that's probably not going to be a one window fix. It's probably to get Hibs to exactly where they want to be. It's probably going to be a long term process. But in terms of just making this managerial appointment just at as the transfer window is about to open next week, it's sort of, there now needs to be a kind of process that runs alongside the long term process almost, that you'd think that gives David Gray the tools he needs for Hibs to be competitive in the coming season, as well as looking at the squad and the makeup of it from a long term perspective. Because I suppose if there's anybody in Hibs history that deserves full backing from the club, it's probably David Gray, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we're repeating ourselves here, but we've seen this over the last few years. Hibs just aren't giving themselves a chance to really build something. Like, we know managers don't get time like they used to. That's obviously not part of football anymore. But I think when you're in the position that Hibs are in, where it's just like a constant churn of players, of staff, you can't really get anything going. You can't get any project started because 7, 8, 9 months down the line, it's okay, right? Rip it up, start again. So I think that's where somebody like Malcolm Mackay helps, because there's that sort of you've kind of got this sort of leadership above the coaching staff who can kind of take a little bit of the heat off them and just say, right, this is what we're going to do. And it's not just the coaching staff, but it's behind the scenes at the club as well. Because I think if you look at what Malcolm McPherson said in that interview that he did with myself recently, he did there was this sort of like, it wasn't quite alluding to it, it was almost saying it in black and white that a lot of good stuff had been done off the pitch in terms of commercial progress, but in terms of the footballing side of things, that was where that's what hadn't been a success. And so that's obviously that's got to be the kind of main focus now. And I think that by having that sporting director in place with that experience and contact, that helps. But also having somebody like David Gray, who he is his own man. I don't think he's not the sort of person to be led from above.
No,
I don't think it'll be a case of
so.
Mackay saying, I don't think Malcolm Mackay is going to be saying, by the way, I think you should play this boy at left back on Saturday. I think Gray would be doing that all himself. And I'll never forget this. It was before one of the sort of finals Hibs played in. Joe Newell did this sort of like meet my teammates type thing, and he was talking about David Gray, who I think was still playing at the time, and said, great captain, sorts us all out with this, that, and the next thing. But I've seen him on the golf course, and there was an angry man in there, which it's kind of stuck with me, because I think Gray just does seem like really kind of mild mannered. Doesn't really get too up or down. But I think knowing that he's got that in his locker, if you like, I think is quite interesting, because I think that does sort of suggest that you've got this character who can Malcolm Mackay said in his comments, he's a strong man manager, and I think you've got someone there who, will be prepared to, give someone a bit of a dressing down if needed, but can also do the arm around the shoulder stuff. And I think that's really, really crucial. To get in a happy dressing room. And just, I suppose, getting the best out of players. I don't think we saw that at times last season. We saw that some players were, maybe playing a bit within themselves or just weren't having the same impact. Don't think there'll be any real risk of that happening with Gray. I just think he's that kind of person who, will know how to get the best out of players. And I think, because it's not that long since he was a player himself, like he knows what it's like in this day and age. He knows what's changed. He knows what, works. He knows what makes certain players tick, or certain types of player tick, certain types of personalities, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think, I would be willing to bet that he's, already has, his transfer targets in place, or at least, who he'd like to sign. you can imagine that was probably part of the interview process, where he said, okay, if you're head coach, what sort of player are you bringing in to help make us as a team competitive on the pitch again? And, I mean, I think it's when he spoke after the 3-0 win against Motherwell, obviously very much of the post match there was about Hanlon and Stevenson, but he did say that the one thing he wanted to do was sort of make the team harder to beat, and that was after they'd been tanked 4-0 at home by Aberdeen a few days earlier, and then they keep a clean sheet. They beat a team that they hadn't beaten all season up until that point, and I think it's going back to basics. It's make the team hard to beat, get players in who can hit the ground running, who aren't going to need spells to bed in, and kind of take it from there. Ask questions later.
Yeah, definitely. Like, just on your earlier point, he definitely does have that quiet authority about him, doesn't he? Like, I kind of only kind of sat in front of him at press conferences on a couple of occasions just towards the end of the season. But I think when you go to these things and then you're sitting in front of somebody new, I always feel you very quickly get a sense of, right, this is that a guy that I would have to be careful not to ask a daft question to. And I definitely, as much as he is kind of mild mannered, great, I definitely got that impression from him as well. He's got that kind of quiet authority about him. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of unquestionable that he will get the full backing of the support, obviously, such as his standing. So it's the beginning of an exciting new era for Hibs, I suppose. But for the moment, I think we will park it there. There'll be plenty more reaction to the appointment to come, of course. It's a big day. It's the kind of the start of the summer, and from Hibs' perspective, almost you think that things are going to really very much accelerate from here. So we'll be around to cover as much of that as we possibly can. If it's on the website or it's here on our YouTube channel, you can subscribe to the website for £4 for 4 months. That's details on the ticker below, hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. So thanks for joining us this morning, folks. Please do stay tuned because we'll have more coming throughout the day. As I said, all the reaction to David Gray's appointment and more. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will catch you again very soon.